Can I invite Imogen Casebourne, who is the Innovation Lab Research Lead at DEFI, and Fawaz Sitta, who is the UNESCO Chair for Anticipatory Systems, a Hughes Hall Visiting Fellow, and working at the Centre for Future Studies at the University of Dubai.
Good morning or good afternoon. I came from Dubai just last night, so it's 4 hours difference into the future, and I fly back today, back to the future in terms of time. And as I mentioned, as I've been introduced, I am a UNESCO chair. My job, UNESCO chair in anticipatory system, my job is actually to help promote ministries around the world to integrate futures thinking into the curriculum of study because it empowers imagination. Our esteemed speaker mentioned that algorithm and data can bring imaginations, but we still maybe need to discuss this. We have a human element into this to bring to the imagination part. I'm not an AI expert, but I can claim I'm a Foresight specialist. We use different methods to look at the future. And today we'll try to explore to you how we imagine the future and how we build our approach. Imogen?
Yes, so I do have more of a background in AI, and I lead research at DEFI's Innovation Lab, and I've been working with Fawaz on a number of projects that we're going to talk you through today.
Yeah, and she told me not to argue with her, so we'll make it as a fluent discussions.
I'm sure you don't.
No. Futures is also about dialogue. We do not predict the future. We are trying to immerse ourselves into the future and try to create an image, how the mental image of the future might unfold too. And most of organizations that we visit, we work with, they use data, past performance in order to create an image into the future. A colleague of mine, in his paper, Macro History and the Future, at the end of the day, futurist thinking is all about how we anticipate a change. He mentioned that future can come in different forms. The change can come in different forms. It could be linear, it could be cyclical, it could be pendulum, it could be a spiral. But to us, and this is what I discussed with him, future can come, could be there's no pattern into the future. It's difficult to bring the future. COVID is an example. Generative AI is another example. If I look back, it might be difficult to imagine the future. We have to look at the present and see the emerging signals that are still being built to see the future. So probably history knowledge can embrace history can embrace our knowledge, but the future can provoke and stimulate our imagination. And we need the two parts when we're trying to build and anticipate the future. And this, what we are trying to propose, and say, don't just look at forecasting. Also use backcasting. Look at the future, and then you backcast to the day today to create. If we live in a stable system where there's no radical change, forecasting is really good, and it can shape the future. But today, we live in a complex world that even the diagram I'm using there, the chart, is some sort of pattern. I didn't find a better chaotic change to have in this. So we have to use different and alternative method. This is a Rogers curve. We operate in the down there as a futurist. We'll try to look at what emerging things that comes. We try to use systems thinking, complexity management, in order to try help how future might emerge too. We are not limited to the top of the layer there, but we're also looking at today what is being emerged. These are just some of the systems that we use in terms to try to anticipate. We have a collection of systems, but I've just chosen those systems or models that we look at into the future. So you see the future triangle, for example, most people, they look at the push of the present. And again, a colleague of mine said, let's look at the pull of the future. That's the second angle we should look at. And we shouldn't forget the weight of the past, which stops us to make the change. We shouldn't look at just the change that is known for everybody. We should deep dive into the systems that make that change. We should look at the narrative of the worldview, and we could change our story. If we change the story of today, we can really reshape the future. We usually include, if we do a study for the education, we are not just meet with policymakers. We sit with parents, with students, teachers, in order to see the different perspective. Every one of us uses the past to reflect the future. If we collectively having a dialogue, we could eliminate cognitive biases while we are creating the images of the future. This is an approach we have used in different projects with DEFI when we are engaged with our partners. We start with the framing, and the most important part, we use the question. Before we try to navigate into the future, we ask the right question. As Peter Drucker mentioned once, our problems not because we have the wrong answers. Our problems, or most of mistakes we do because we ask the wrong question. So in the framing, we spend most of the time trying to ask the right questions. Then we go and have a dive into what is being emerged today. Not only a trend, also those weak signals. We use axes of uncertainties in trying to just see what are the changes that might influence the future. We use a future triangle, other methods to also have deepening our knowledge of today, trying to eliminate cognitive biases. And the other thing that I have to highlight here, scenarios. We tend to see organizations have one strategy or one plan. And this is not really building adaptive organizations. We encourage to have different and multiple scenarios in order to anticipate how the future might unfold too. And who's better than being adaptive is those who can influence their future. And that's we move to the preferred future, defining our vision into the future and eventually doing the alignment of today. So, this is a study, we've done it at Cambridge, which Imogen will talk about. But this is the question we have been highlighting when we've done this study. Imogen?
Yes, so in order to address this question, we brought together people from across the university, from Cambridge University Press and Assessment, also from the Department of Education, invited people from the departments of anthropology, from computing, so that we have a range of voices and experiences. And we invited people to think about what they're seeing today that might potentially influence the changes and the types of change that Fawaz was talking about earlier. So having spent time framing a question, we then divided it into sub-questions, and we assembled groups from different disciplines to search for information for what we call trends that might potentially impact the future. And we went through quite a long stage of what horizon scanning, so looking at academic research, but also grey literature, what companies are spending their money on, what they're investing in, and then coming together in a series of workshops to discuss those findings and to consider plausible ways in which some of those trends might evolve. So AI being clearly an important thing to consider in assessment, but there are other things that also emerged as important, Thanks, Fawaz. So, for example, well-being. There's a lot of discourse and debate around well-being, both for students and for teachers. And so there's a question of how high-stakes assessment feed into that debate and how assessment might evolve and how that might impact well-being. There are also questions about climate change. How might things evolve in the light of some of the changes that we might anticipate as a result of climate change. And then there are other things that are perhaps other innovations, other technologies that are progressing at the same time. A lot of companies are putting a lot of investment into immersive technologies, into glasses, into AR, into VR. And we're certainly not seeing that becoming very ubiquitous yet. It tends to be small studies of how it might be used in education. But if we're looking further forward into the future, then a question to ask is, will those technologies have become ubiquitous at some point in the future? And if they had, what impact might that have? How might that integrate with the other things, such as climate change, such as artificial intelligence?
Also, we have to remember that artificial intelligence shouldn't just create a noise to focus onto this. But what could come beyond artificial intelligence? What other emerging trends could be augmented and disrupt education into the future? We have also been invited by the Emirates College to look at the role of teachers, not only as an direct impact of artificial intelligence, but from other perspectives. And this, a traditional question we always ask: what is impossible? That it is possible today will change everything, just to open up the imagination. And the interesting part, with this study, we are not limited with policymakers. We have invited around 60 people, students, parents, teachers, and policymakers into the whole study of this. And new emerging trends, emerging signals appear into this.
Yeah, so sometimes when we're thinking of a range of plausible outcomes, ways in which things could develop, we ask people to think of perhaps some more negative ways in which things might develop. And one of the groups of students imagined a world in which technology had developed and become more advanced. Perhaps there were chips that could assist people with thinking, but the digital divide had remained the same, and therefore some people had free versions that were not very good, and other people had premium versions that were much more effective. So they imagined a world in which technology had advanced, but some of the challenges that we see today with technology had persisted, and they imagined a scenario with a child on the phone to technical support trying to get their chip to work so that they could pass their exams. So it's a way of directing people to think about ways in which things might plausibly change, and then discussing the different plausible scenarios and how we might prefer them to change, what we might want to avoid.
And these are some of the signals that emerged from this study. And again, we'd like to emphasize here, we shouldn't just look and try to fix what advancement could happen in artificial intelligence, but what about immersive or intelligent augmented reality? As Imogen said, implants. We've seen a few weeks ago, they have a human implant chip implants, so how this might emerge into the future. So what we are highlighting here, that there are other emerging trends beside artificial intelligence, and we shouldn't have just one change creating a noise about the other changes. We have to anticipate and open up to all plausibility. This is another study we've looked at, which is, I can see actually, teachers' well-being. We've seen lots of student well-being focus into this, and we thought this is a study is to look at the teachers' well-being. We've been engaging with postgraduate students specialized in teaching, to look at the future. And we're expanding this study also to include teachers into the picture and to reflect into that, and also policymakers. Now, from this study, we have 4 scenarios. You've seen the scary ones or the prosperous one. And we use only 2 dimensions to create those images. And I think with including other participants into this study, we're going to see new dimensions into the future that will emerge. And we should keep an eye on those emerging trends in order to anticipate and be ready to be adaptive to influence to that change. Another study we have here is to look at 10 signals, and we engaged with the Faculty of Education students to look at those disruptions and see. And you see in the ACT, and we've told them to look at those signals in terms of plausibility and impact. And if it is predictable and high impact, that means we should to act today. And these are some of images that we have received when we ask them about what should we do today in order to design. And I like this: no teacher, no grades, everyone can learn and be able to learn together. This is one of the images that has emerged while we're doing this. Not necessarily this is an image will emerge, but we maybe should consider and try to plan ahead. Last one, actually, we've been invited to look at, will a university exist into the future? This is a question they have asked us. And we said, before we ask this, what's the time horizon for this? Will the university exist? Is it 10, 20, 30, 40? And in which space is it going to exist before we firmly ask this question?
So this was convened by some students whose hall this debate, and you can see some of the interesting things that emerged. And we had an interesting debate around just the buildings, because we talked about the ideas of co-presence. So we're sat here together today, and we are concentrating together on ideas about artificial intelligence in the future. But what might that be like if you were dialing in from your home? The experience might feel different. You might be interrupted. You might have problems with your Wi-Fi connection. So we were talking about the importance of people actually coming together as an experience of studying together. That I think that's something we thought that people would continue to value. And people's homes, learning in their homes, they're very different. Some people live in noisy homes where it's difficult to find a place to study, and others don't. So those were some of the questions. But conversely, I think some other ideas emerge.
Yeah, we could, if we have hyperdense space, we could save the environment. You don't have to travel to go to those places. So where's the balance that we have to create when we develop into the future of education? Now, future is all about dialogue. And we would like to see your perspective here into this question. In the era of radical advancement, what might emerge in the next 20 years? Do you have the connection, right? Yeah.
I think everyone got it. Excellent.
Yes. Now let's see the response. That's the first one. I like this one. Divergence of critical thinking.
Oh, interesting. So some people becoming more able to engage in critical thinking and some people less. I think that's how I understand that.
Yeah.
New types of universities. I saw also iterative learning throughout the lifespan. So perhaps universities might be evolving to better enable that kind of learning, because it can be quite difficult currently, as Charles Clark mentioned earlier, for people to come back to that learning. Gamified simulations, yes, interesting. And I think Alina was talking about the potential to teach through simulations and to gather data, and that's something that PISA did in 2015 to assess communication skills and collaboration skills.
Sorry.
Decolonizing education, new ways to measure AI as a teacher, perhaps a dialogue with AI.
We could agree, disagree with this, but always it's not good to anticipate how the future might unfold too, so you're not going to be surprised. We'll be happy to share this also with you, and thank you so much.
We will now, to take us through to lunch, have a session of question and answers with all this morning's keynote speakers. So maybe I could ask them to come and sit at the front. Questions and answers will be moderated by my colleague, Bryan Maddox, who is the Digital Assessment Futures Lead at DEFI. He's visiting professor at the Centre of Educational Measurement at the University of Oslo and visiting professor at the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia. Thank you.
What a fantastic morning. Really brilliant. And I just want to say on behalf of everybody, fantastic presentations, extremely stimulating. I'm kind of overwhelmed with ideas and information from the presentations. It's just fantastic. So thank you very much to all the speakers. So I think perhaps Jude gave me this role to chair this session because she knew I'd be tempted to ask too many questions. So giving me this role means I could probably only ask one question. And I've been thinking about what that question might be. Alina's, come and join us. Alina's comment, part of her presentation was this famous quote that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And in the last few years, I've taken to questioning received knowledge a lot. And I was thinking, is this true? Is the future really here and not evenly distributed? And I'm beginning to wonder. And so I kind of wanted to throw that back to as an opening question from me to the panel. And the question really is to the panel, are we there yet? And if we're not there yet, somewhere in the future, what are the steps and methods that we might take in your area to get to where you imagine the future might be? So over to you. Who would like to go first? Anybody? Should we go in this order? Fawaz, are we there yet?
So mentally, yeah, we should be into the future and then backcast. But still, we should prepare for it. We are today at the shadow of the future. The future is being made today. So the present, we should really look at what is happening today as a weak signal in order to be able to anticipate what might happen in the future.
Yeah. Go on. It's extremely interesting, the idea of a weak signal for the future, which suggests to me that there are signals, but we can't necessarily read them in the same way. They're giving us hints about what the future may look like, but they're not providing a roadmap. So it's very interesting. Imogen, do you want to add something?
Yes, so I think that's an excellent point. We can't know which bits of the future are here, or we can't be certain. I think design-based research and participatory design-based research is a way of taking us to the future, ensuring that people's voices are heard in those designs and that people have a say into what futures they would like to see. So trying things out and iterating, having hypotheses based on what we can see happening in the present and what we might like to happen is perhaps a way of moving forward.
Thanks. Alina, are we there yet?
Well, if you might recall, I mentioned a quote from William Gibson, which I believe is still true as an answer to your question. We are there yet in some places. There are islands of innovators, research labs in different countries, in different places, at institutions or in academia. We are not there yet as a society. So it takes more than innovation to get there. I really appreciated that on your map. I've seen the resistance to technology. the Luddite approach, feelings and fear that drives so many of the decisions. Then is the political aspect and policy aspects of where we can be and what guardrail different governments will put on all of us for getting there. Also, it's related to what I said before, that it takes a village. It's not one thing that helps us get to wherever future we imagine and want to see built. We need peace. We need to figure out how to deal with climate change. We need to figure out how to work together. I mean, all of this matter. The world is getting smaller and smaller. I mean, just look at us. We are here so many countries, and that's an example of how small everything gets. And I think it's a wonderful time to be a contributor. And I'm very positive and optimistic that we will get to different versions of the future that we like.
Thank you. I was thinking about your question, Brian, and I did find it difficult to deal with because, for me, almost definitionally, we are not in the future. And for me, the phrase which you recalled with the question is that one, the future belongs to those who prepare for it, which is what I've always believed. And I couldn't remember, I just looked at my new brain extension, which I happen to have in my pocket, to say who said this, and I shocked myself by apparently Malcolm X said the future belongs to those who prepared for it. And I was rather surprised to see that was the case. But I profoundly believe it. Now, the whole point about that phrase is, of course, you can't prepare for a future. You can prepare yourself for a range of futures, which you both indicated in your presentation earlier. And I think the point that's really poorly understood is we are living in a world of accelerating change. It's not a question of stop the world, I'll get off. We go through this change, and suddenly we've all sorted it, and we're in a new place. We can all relax now. It's accelerating change. And that is very, very, very difficult to deal with. I would say that this university, for example, is not very good at dealing with even non-accelerating change, let alone accelerating change, in the way it approaches things. But that's certainly a challenge for governments, but which is almost entirely not acknowledged by governments. It's a challenge for individuals, and again, as I said, and what I said, is a challenge for institutions. But I go back to my old friend Malcolm X. The future belongs to those who prepare for it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also feel it's quite difficult to give a certain answer. Why it is difficult is because in China, especially for the industrials, for lots of the digital industrials, they have a slogan, always saying, the future is here. The future is at your body size. However, when you see that, and you may feel that you are actually creating the future. I think this is what they really mean. However, they always trying to push most of the young guys, for example, my daughter and some of the sons, who actually work for 16 hours a day and 6 days a week to trying to produce more and more and to innovate more and more for the future, which means the future is not here, the future is in the future. Exactly. Which means, I just give you an example of the University of Cambridge. It's 800 years of university, but can you see the universities always remain the same in 800 years? Never. Which means you're just following the demands for the future. I think this is education. We're not assuming that the campus like China, our campus, like Peking University, with a wall just surrounding our campus, that's a real campus. But here we don't find the wall up here. So which means the university may in different forms, but they are because the most successful in the enlightenment of the university was created is that being organized research and specialized disciplinaries, which actually solved a lot of problems the human beings demand, the human beings faced. So I think the future actually is being created by ours, and also we're not so certain our created is definitely, absolutely, is the future. I'm not so sure.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Right, let's have some questions from the floor. when you ask your questions, it would be helpful. I'm not going to ask you necessarily to say who you are unless you would like to, but if you could say who you would like to direct the question to. Is it for everybody or somebody in specifically? Yeah, and Jude has the mic, and she's going to pass it to the first person with a hand up. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. So I'm Wayne Holmes, University College London. I'm really interested in the last presentation, and I'm interested because you're dealing with an area, artificial intelligence in particular, around which there's an awful lot of ignorance. So I'm curious, when you're doing the future scanning, the horizon scanning, how do you get rid of that ignorance, and how do you also get rid of the powerful voices that have agendas? And then as a corollary to that, how do you know when you're talking to these people that we're not talking about hopes for the future rather than genuine thoughts about what the future will become?
I think if it's okay, I'm going to distribute the questions out a bit there. So Imogen or Fawaz, would you like to pick up on that one first?
Yes. Yeah. I think this is a very difficult question, and there is no perfect answer for that. But yet we do try to use different methods in order to help bring people from different perspectives to address specific. All people in one room. And futures thinking is all about dialogue and having a discussion. We use different methods in order to help them try to change the story of today and try to influence how the future might unfold too. And in terms of hope, that's why we have different scenarios. For example, some clients or some partners we deal with, they say, don't show me the collapsing scenario, I don't want to look at it. But yet we encourage to see that collapsing scenario to open up the change for that. And that's why we have different scenarios in this perspective. Imogen?
Yeah, just to add to that, an early part of the process is to speak with experts and try and ensure that the various nuances of the various trends and themes are captured, and then to try and translate those to make them as easy to understand as possible for people in the scenarios.
Yeah, also to be aware of a certain agendas from the experts, also to keep an eye if this is a genuine signal that is emerging or is driven by a commercial into influencing the future. So we still, even though we invite experts, people who works on labs into those changes, we keep an eye into those, and we also reflect from the participants in those studies and see their perspectives into the future.
Jude, we can have an extra 5 minutes, can't we, of question and answer? We can run it. Okay. I think...
I would
go
like
ahead,
to comment on a few things. One is another quote, which is attributed to Ford, when he said that when he started talking about cars, that if he would have asked people what they wanted, they would have responded, faster horses. And I think this is a very serious limitation of human mind and human imagination when talking about the future. So that's one comment. The second is I believe that actually a lot of progress is made in the commercial area, and that in turn the commercial area will impact theories. And we saw in the examples given that actually we do see significant new developments because of the commercial developments with AI, with other technologies that support the application of AI. So one response was directly to the question. The other one was to address your comment about commercially.
Why don't we pass the, if you would like to. Would you like to say something else?
Okay.
No.
No? Okay. Let's have another question or two. Yes. Can we have the mic down here? So go ahead, please.
Simon Lieber, Stewardinga. Charles, you made the interesting comment that it's very important that there are high levels of autonomy for stakeholders and users of AI in order to develop their own strategies for how most profitably and usefully to adopt these technologies and their implementation in education. I'd be very interested in your thoughts and other panel members' thoughts on what that means in terms of what sort of challenge that represents for regulatory thinking, which obviously operates on the basis of trying to achieve rather more uniform outcomes, because there clearly is a paradox there, and I think that's going to be a challenge in terms of driving this whole programme forward.
Okay, and can we have one more question before the panellists? Somebody here? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I teach modern languages at this university, and in one of the scenarios, I'm guessing you know what's coming. There was one thing saying the complete collapse of language learning as one of the future scenarios. And I'd like to connect this to the very first talk today by Alina van Davier. I think that maybe quite a few of us will go home remembering your phrase, a cat is a pet. Now, I'd like to link these two, because in my mind, I'm constantly worrying how, if we're using large language models, generative text models, where's the room for humor? Where's the room for metaphors? Where's the room for creativity? These are the questions that I have. And maybe just to say about the quote by Ford, who's to say that we wouldn't be better off with faster horses? Right? Okay. So I think we need to kind of think about this in a much bigger way. Thank you very much.
I'm enjoying the questions so much, and I'm aware that it's nearly lunchtime, so I think let's have one more question, and then the panelists can answer whichever one they would like to. Is there one more? Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all of you for your presentations. It's quite a simple question, really. How old do you think, or how young do you think children should be when they first start learning how to use and what AI is all about?
Okay, so there's 3 questions, I think, for the panelists to answer whichever one they would like to.
Okay, just on Simon's point on regulation. Regulation doesn't have to equal uniformity. And he knows this more than anybody, but you don't have to have a uniform system of assessment or whatever applied by regulation. However, the uniformity comes in with, for example, rules about university entrance and therefore what you do about assessment, or employers saying they want certain kinds of things. And I think it's worth thinking harder about how you get regulation without uniformity. And that relates too to the languages question. Here in this university was established something called the Languages Ladder, which I in fact first commissioned as Secretary of State to try and learn languages in the same way as the music grades, for example. And that highlights the difference between the skill of speaking a language, e.g. French, whatever, and the wider cultural questions, very important, that you mentioned about history, language, culture, and so on. And at the moment, our assessment systems tend to put these all together into one bag. And I don't think it's clear that they should be in one bag. I think the question of how you align skill development with the assessment system at the age of 16 is a big challenge of the moment. Do I go this way and then?
Okay, I just respond for 2. One is for language learning. And for language learning, we used to do it, especially in the education, did as incubations. Just putting people following you and do things like you and then learn it. But now the AI, I think, especially in our university, we have a program trying to promote the language learning with the scientific evidence. For example, your tones and your throats. How to use your tones and throats and do it more precisely and for individuals rather than for the whole bunch of the people. So this, I think, AI may do in the future. And for how old and how young you can learn the AI or couple with AI, I don't think age is a problem. I don't think there's an age divide among those of the people with AI learning or practice with AI. It's a kind of a willingness. If you do like it, and you can do it. I think the country, especially for the national policy, our policymaker over here, actually provide the opportunities for everyone. At least in my country, we can do that. So digital literacy is one of the big issues in our policymakers, and we have a policy for that.
So I would like to respond to the question about the language and the language used for assessment. So if one develops a standardized high-stakes test with human experts writing the items, I don't know how many of you are familiar with what it takes and how that works. But the way it works is there is very little space for creativity. Actually, you get penalized if you are too creative. And the reason for that is that assessment, standardized assessment, well, they need to be standardized. So there is a very specific rubric that a human developer needs to follow to develop those items. That means that in the end, it does not really matter who develops the items on a standardized test. What matters is the quality of those items for the purpose. Now, this is very different on how, and as our colleagues mentioned, it's very different from learning about the culture, where other elements of the literature and so on could be part of what we want students to interact with. So I would say that's a very different area of application, but for standardized assessment, that's not a problem. I also agree with the comment about age. I do not think it's an age divide with respect to AI or any other technology. It's just the willingness to think outside of the box. And whether we would have been better off with faster horses, I leave that to you all to answer that.
So to answer two of the questions together, I'm aware of at least one project using AI to try and teach very young children to grow up bilingual, where their parents might not be bilingual, but they would wish their children to learn a language from an early age. So certainly, I'm not an early years expert, so I don't want to say whether I think it should be available to all ages, but certainly there is research in teaching children languages at a very young age. And I think it would be a shame if we did see a collapse of language learning. There's a wonderful list of untranslatable words where I don't know if you've come across it, but words that beautifully capture a context or an idea or a concept that exists only in one language and not in others. And I think if we were to completely lose that sort of language learning, we might lose some conceptual richness along the way.
I'll go with the age part of it. And instead of looking at the answer now, I think we should ask the question more properly into what age and articulate the question. Study the question. I think we should articulate the question first and then study the emerging things that might emerge from this question. And regarding of the collapsing, it's a scenario that we saw because of emerging technologies. This is not necessarily is true, but it could emerge, and we should be ready for that. Learning is not only to communicate. Learning as a second language, we know it provoke thinking, it provoke imaginations, and I think might this stay. But let's look at it and see how that might unfold.
Okay, the questions have been fantastic. I'm sure over lunch there'll be a lot more discussion to have. Judah, it's time for lunch, is that right? Mark, do you want to say any last words?
Yes, thank you all very much indeed for this morning. It was fantastic.